Most people think the first $100,000 is a number. It is not. It is a threshold, a psychological threshold, a behavioral threshold, a structural threshold. And if you do not understand that, you can spend your whole life chasing income while never once building the machine that would have changed everything. That is the tragedy. People think the difference between those who get ahead and those who stay stuck is often talent, luck, or income. Sometimes those things matter, but far more often the real difference is simpler. Some people build systems, some people live on reactions. That is the story I want to tell you, because if I had to build my first $100,000 again, I would not begin with fantasy. I would not begin with hot stocks. I would not begin with side hustle nonsense or social media bravado or the teenage fantasy that one dramatic move is going to rescue me from years of drift. I would begin with structure. I would begin with numbers. I would begin with cash flow. I would begin with debt. I would begin with automation. I would begin with building a financial life so boring and so disciplined that most people would completely overlook the power of it. That is exactly why it works, because the first 100,000 is not built by a genius move. It is built by getting 1,000 ordinary decisions pointed in one direction. That is why so few people ever get there. They are trying to win through effort in a game that is really won through design. Now let me tell you why I care so much about that number. 100,000 is not magical because it makes you rich overnight. It is magical because it changes the speed of the machine. That is the first thing most people never understand. Below that number, almost all the motion comes from you. Your hours, your paycheck, your restraint, your effort, your saving, your refusing, your discipline, your saying no, your redirecting. But once the base gets large enough, money begins to carry more of the load. Compounding becomes visible. Your investments start producing amounts that do not feel trivial anymore. Confidence rises because you can finally see the machine responding. And with that confidence comes something people rarely talk about, but everyone feels. You stop panicking over every little decision. You have a moat, a little distance, a little room, a little more margin between life and disaster. The file you gave me says this directly in its own language. Once you reach the first 100,000, money really starts to work for you. Confidence grows, your options grow, and you stop worrying about every small financial choice because you finally have a financial moat that is not motivational fluff. That is the emotional reality of margin Fay fallacyte Fay turn 31 file 0 Fay. Now before we go any further, I want to crush one of the dumbest myths in personal finance. If I just earned more, I would be rich. Maybe you would feel relief for a little while, maybe you would breathe easier for a season. Maybe you would upgrade some things that had been delayed too long, but rich is not what income does automatically. Rich is what structure allows. The file says it plainly. The problem is not only how much you earn, it is what you do with the money. And that explains why households earning $100,000 to $150,000 can still be stressed about paying bills. People hear that and act shocked. I am not shocked at all. Give a disorganized system more money and you often just get a more expensive form of chaos. Fay file site, Fay turn 31 file 0 Fay. This is one reason I dislike how people fantasize about money. When people imagine having more, they almost never imagine systems. They imagine spending the bigger house, the nicer car, the better vacation, the upgraded life, the right schools, the status symbols that sound practical when spoken aloud and expensive when calculated. Honestly, that is why more money by itself does not solve the problem. The world is extremely efficient at helping you spend any increase in income. The world has rehearsed that script very well. You get a raise, the world says bigger place, you do better. The world says nicer car, you make progress. The world says now you deserve the luxury version. Before long, the money has gone out the door and your future got nothing but a better story to tell at dinner. That is why I have always insisted on something that many people misunderstand. I want you to live a rich life today and an even richer life tomorrow, both not one or the other. That means spending extravagantly on what you love and cutting costs mercilessly on what you do not. The file states this in a direct way, and it is one of the strongest principles in it. I agree with it completely. The point is not deprivation, the point is selectivity. Fay file site Fay turn 31 file 0 Fay. I am not interested in penny pinching theater. I do not care how many times somebody reuses a paper towel. I do not care if somebody brags about walking across town to save $2 while completely ignoring the giant financial decisions ruining the rest of their life. That is not seriousness. That is distraction. The real financial game is played in a few big levers: housing, transportation, debt, saving rate, income growth, investment behavior, automation. Those matter. If you get those right, you can live very well. If you get those wrong, no amount of beet salad guilt is going to save you. Now I want to show you why the first 100,000 is so hard. It is hard because the machine is weak at first. That is not a moral statement. That is math. The file gives a very useful example. Invest $600 a month at 7%, and after 10 years you cross $100,000 with about $72,000 coming from contributions and roughly $30,000 coming from compound growth. That example matters because it reveals the shape of the struggle. Early on you are doing most of the lifting. The machine helps, but only modestly. Then, as the base grows, the balance begins to owe less to what you add and more to what the system itself is producing. That is when the curve becomes beautiful. File site. Turn 31 file 0 Fay. That is why the first 100,000 feels so stubborn. You are pushing the flywheel by hand. And because that stage is so effort heavy, many people quit before they ever reach the point where the machine starts helping in a way they can feel. That is tragic, because the hardest stretch is exactly the stretch people are most likely to abandon. Now, if you are serious about getting there, the first step is not sexy. Eliminate high-interest debt. This is where I become very blunt. You cannot build serious wealth while paying credit card interest, like tribute to the banks. You can pretend, you can talk a good game, you can buy books, you can watch videos, you can open a brokerage account and feel proactive. But if 27% is working against you while 7 or 8% is trying to work for you, you are dragging a weight vest through every financial decision you make. The file says this very clearly. High-interest debt is the one place where speed matters most, because compound interest is no longer building your life. It is eating it. That is exactly right. There is no elegant way to say it as long as that debt is there. It is very hard to accelerate. Turn 31 file 0 Fay. This does not mean you must become ashamed. Shame is useless, but clarity is required. Most people do not even know how much they owe, at what rate, or when it will be gone. That alone tells you how unserious the average approach is. The first thing I would do if I had to rebuild is list every debt, every rate, every minimum, every due date. And I would attack the highest friction parts of my life first, because what debt really steals is not only money. It steals capacity. It steals optionality. It steals the emotional room you need in order to build calmly. Once that debt is gone, the machine changes. Now the money that used to flow backward can finally flow forward. And that is where the second part begins. CEO, I like that framework in the source because it is simple enough for ordinary people to use and serious enough to matter. C stands for cutting costs. E stands for earning more. O stands for optimizing your finances. That is not flashy. It is simply the right sequence. Turn 31. File 0 Fay. Let us start with cutting costs. This is another place where people become childish. They say, what if I love everything? No, you do not. You do not care equally about protein powder, restaurants, subscriptions, electronics, clothes, beauty treatments, convenience spending, and luxury travel. You simply do not want to make trade-offs. That is what people mean when they say they love everything. They mean, I do not want to admit that some things matter more than others. But mature money requires ranking. That is why a conscious spending plan is so powerful. The file points people toward exactly that. And I think it is wise. Once you see your money on one page, it becomes embarrassingly obvious what is and is not important. And once that becomes obvious, cutting is no longer punishment. It becomes alignment. Turn 31 file 0 Fay. This is one of the deepest truths in personal finance. Cutting costs only feels miserable when you are cutting the wrong things. When you cut what you do not care about in order to spend more on what you love and invest more in your future, the whole emotional tone changes. That is why I say again, the point is not to live small. The point is to stop funding things that do not deserve your life force. Now let us go to earning more. The file is right again here. Income is a skill. This matters because far too many people still treat income like weather. I make what I make, my boss decides, my industry decides, the economy decides. Number those things matter, but they are not the whole story. Earning more is a learnable skill. Negotiation is a skill. Interviewing is a skill. Resume positioning is a skill. Selling is a skill. Building a side business is a skill. Finding underpriced value in what you can do is a skill. The moment people understand that, their entire posture changes. They stop waiting to be chosen and start learning how to become more valuable in the market. That is a different life. Now I want to be clear. More income alone does not make you rich. We already established that. But the person with stronger systems and stronger income skills accelerates much faster than the person who has either one alone. That is why the E matters. Not because it saves you by itself, because it gives more fuel to a machine that now knows what to do with fuel. Then comes O, optimize your finances. This is where ordinary people dramatically overestimate complexity and underestimate systems. I do not want you manually tracking every penny for the rest of your life. I do not want your budget to become a hobby. I do not want your financial life to feel like a part-time accounting internship. I want automation. The file lays this out as an automation flow. And that is exactly the right phrase. Income comes in, money is automatically moved to savings, automatically moved to investing, and what remains is available for guilt. Free spending, that is how adults build wealth while still living like human beings. Fay file site Fay turn 31 file 0. Fay automation is not laziness. It is leverage. It means your good intentions stop needing to win a fresh argument every month. The transfer happens before your moods get a vote. That is what systems do. They prevent your weakest daily self from overruling your strongest long-term self. That is why automation beats budgeting apps for many people. 1,000 tiny categories do not create wealth. A working flow does. Now let me show you one of my favorite details from the reference document, the 1% December increase. This is the kind of simple rule that can change a life because it is small enough not to scare people and powerful enough to matter enormously over time. The idea is straightforward. If you are investing 10% of your income, every December raise it by 1%. Just one. The file makes the point that this increase is often small enough. You will barely feel it while still being large enough to create enormous wealth over time, especially as your income rises and the percentage scales with it. That is one of the smartest examples in the whole document because it shows how wealth often grows, quietly, incrementally, without drama. Fay Felicite Fay turn 31 file 0 Fay. This is what people do not understand. The big life is usually built through small, repeated upgrades, not through emotional overhauls. That is why I distrust dramatic financial declarations. I will save 50% starting tomorrow. I will never spend again. I will optimize every category. I will build 3 side hustles. That is not usually seriousness. That is usually a temporary emotional spike. What I trust is what can survive an ordinary Tuesday. 1% can survive. An automation flow can survive. A conscious spending plan can survive. That is why they work. Now, as your system grows, you must protect it. The source material introduces the idea of a moat here, which is one of my favorite images in finance. A financial moat is your emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of living expenses, accessible, liquid, boring there for the specific purpose of absorbing the shocks that would otherwise force you backward. Fay file site Fay turn 31 file 0 Fay. This is one of the biggest mistakes young aggressive investors make. They think every dollar should be invested. Some dollars are not for return, some dollars are for resilience. That distinction matters if your car breaks down, if a medical bill hits, if the economy turns ugly. If your job shakes, the emergency fund is what prevents an inconvenience from becoming a financial identity crisis. The file says this, well, keep it somewhere accessible and predictable, and think of it as protecting the castle. That is right. A moat is not there to make the castle richer. It is there to stop the enemy from getting in. Fay file site Fay turn 31 file 0 Fay. I like 3 to 6 months as a baseline. I like 12 months. If your life is unstable, your income is cyclical, or you simply sleep better that way. After that, yes, there are more productive places for capital, but below that, false aggression is often just stupidity wearing a brave face. Now let us talk about investing itself. This is where the noise gets loud and the right answer gets boring. Good. I like boring. The file recommends simple low-cost index funds and target date funds, and I think that is exactly right for most people. Index funds because they are diversified, low-cost, and extremely hard for most active managers to beat over time. Target date funds because they simplify the whole process even further, automatically diversifying and gradually becoming more conservative as the retirement date approaches. That is not exciting cocktail party conversation. That is a functioning wealth system. Fay file site Fay turn 31 file 0 Fay and costs matter. This is another one of those quiet truths that changes outcomes enormously. A portfolio paying 1% in fees instead of 0.2% over decades can lose hundreds of thousands of dollars to those extra costs. The file gives an example showing that difference approaching roughly $400,000 over a long investing horizon. That is not a nuisance. That is a huge piece of a retirement. Fay site Fay turn 31 file 0 Fay. This is why I say over and over again that a lot of financial life is subtraction. Not only what you add, what you stop leaking, what you stop paying, what you stop pretending is too small to matter. Now let me get to another part of the reference document that I think is deeply important. Please stop asking broke people for wealth advice. That sounds rude. It is also sensible environment matters. If the people around you normalize chaos, under-saving, consumer debt, financial ignorance, and magical thinking, then those habits begin to feel ordinary. The file makes the point that many people cannot even name a single person they know who is genuinely good with money. That is an incredible social handicap, because what feels normal shapes what feels possible. Fay file site Fay turn 31 file 0 Fay. That is one reason communities matter so much. Not because you need rich friends to become rich, but because you need examples. You need people who normalize discussing investing, saving, systems, debt payoff, fees, automation, and the long game without making it sound either shameful or impossible. The surrounding script matters. Now, even if you do everything right, traps remain. The file lists 4, and they are excellent. Get rich, quick culture, toxic frugality, extremism, the I missed my chance syndrome, and the optimization spiral. Fay Felicite Fay turn 31 file 0 Fay. Let us take them one at a time. Get rich, quick culture is poison because it flatters the part of you that wants to skip the build phase. Meme stocks, overleveraged Airbnb fantasies. Side hustle performative culture that tells you to work all night and sleep 3 hours if you really want it. I have no patience for this. Real wealth is usually built through smart systems that take time, not through theatrical shortcuts. Then toxic frugality, extremism. This is another form of missing the point entirely. If your whole life becomes deprivation, if you save 70% for 15 years while learning nothing about how to enjoy money, then you may retire into a life you do not even know how to inhabit. The file is right here too. A rich life requires both the skill of saving and the skill of spending. That is a much healthier philosophy. Then the missed my chance syndrome. This is where regret becomes laziness wearing a tragic face. Yes, maybe you should have started at 20. You did not. And now what the file says this clearly: do not make the same mistake twice. That is exactly the right sentence. Mourning the lost years is one thing. Using them as a reason to lose the next 10 is idiotic. Then the optimization spiral. I laughed when I read that section because it captures a very modern disease. People optimize coffee, calories, workflows, relationship texts, air travel points, and savings account rates to gain $4 while ignoring the point of money entirely. The point of money is not to win small spreadsheet battles. It is to build a rich, meaningful life through systems that work. That is why I want to bring this all together in one simple truth. The first $100,000 is not really built by hustle. It is built by finally deciding that money will no longer be handled accidentally. That is the real transformation, from accidental to intentional, from emotional to structural, from reactive to designed, from income only thinking to system thinking. If you have debt, clear the worst of it. If your costs are sloppy, tighten what does not matter. If your income is low, build the skill of increasing it. If your savings are inconsistent, automate them. If your investing is chaotic, simplify it. If your life has no moat, build one. If your community normalizes being broke, find a new script. If your mind keeps looking for speed, return to process. That is how the first 100,000 is built, not by magic, by the repeated refusal to live financially by accident. And once you arrive there, something very important happens. Money starts moving differently. It still is not enough to do everything. Fine, that was never the point. The point is that the machine has been started, and once the machine starts, if you keep feeding it and keep protecting it, the whole curve of your life begins to bend. That is why the first 100,000 matters so much. Not because it makes you rich, because it makes the rest possible. That is how I would want any serious person to think about it. Not as a trophy, as a threshold, not as a number, as a system, not as the end of struggle, as the beginning of momentum. And momentum, when protected long enough, is one of the most powerful forces in all of money.